HOA Nightmare. They messed with the wrong disabled veteran. I never asked for any of this. I was just a writer, content in my quiet life, finally finding peace after a messy divorce. But peace, as I was about to learn, is a fragile thing, especially when it comes face to face with the kind of petty tyranny only a homeowners association can unleash. It all started the day I came home and found my sister's wheelchair ramp vanish. Not damaged, not misplaced, gone, like a bad dream. I knew then this wasn't just about wood and nails. This was war. I'd moved to Clearwater, Florida, 3 years ago, seeking solace after my split from Monica. No screaming matches, no kids, just a slow, agonizing realization that we wanted different things. She craved adventure, impulsivity. I craved stability. So I bought a modest house in a seemingly tranquil, HOA-governed neighborhood. Westbrook Pines, the brochure chirped, a community of peaceful living. Peaceful, my foot. The Westbrook Pines HOA was the kind of entity that thrived on the trivial. Mailbox colors, lawn height, the precise number of petunias allowed in a pot. They obsess over it all. And presiding over this kingdom of minutiae was Margaret Sterling, the HOA president. She was a silver-haired Gorgon, always draped in crisp linen, her expression permanently etched with disdain. I'd witnessed her reduce grown men to quivering wrecks of a rogue dandelions. Our interactions had been minimal until the letter arrived. It has come to our attention. The letter began with the passive aggression only a retiree in power can muster, that you have added an unapproved structure to your property. As per Westbrook Pines HOA regulations, all exterior modifications must be submitted for approval. You are in violation of Section 4B of the code. Please remove the unauthorized structure within 14 days to avoid penalties. Sincerely, Margaret Sterling, HOA president. The unauthorized structure was a wheelchair ramp, a simple, sturdy thing I'd built for my sister, Danielle, who visited a few times a year. Danielle had been paralyzed in a horrific car accident at 19. Her life had become a relentless battle against a world designed without her in mind. The constant struggle against ignorance and indifference. I fought alongside her for years, knew her rights, knew my rights. I shot back a carefully worded response, citing the Fair Housing Act, referencing legal precedents. I genuinely believed that would be the end of it. I was so wrong. A week later, I returned home from errands, had a cold fist clenched in my gut before I even reached the driveway. The ramp was gone, erased as if it had never existed. Not merely damaged or disassembled, the wood had been hauled away, a bolts ripped out, leaving not even a splinter behind. For a long, silent moment, I simply stood there, gripping my steering wheel so hard my knuckles burned. Then I saw them, standing on the sidewalk. Margaret Sterling, flanked by Neil Davenport, the HOA's so-called architectural compliance officer, a weasel of a man with perpetually pursed lips. Margaret spoke first, her voice dripping with a maddening civility. "Mr. Carter," she said, as if discussing a misplaced recycling bin, "we had to take action. You ignored the removal notice." I turned to face her, my voice unnaturally calm, fueled by barely suppressed fury. "You demolished a federally protected accessibility structure." Margaret didn't flinch. As stated in our guidelines, all modifications must be approved. Accessibility features are no exception. A short, humorless life escaped me. The law says otherwise. The HOA regulations take precedence in this community, Mr. Carter. And in that moment, I understood. Margaret Sterling believed she was above the law. She thought HOA bylaws were the final word, that she could enforce them with impunity. That was her fatal mistake. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply turned, walked into my house, and dialed my lawyer, Jeff Kingsley. Jeff specialized in disability rights cases, and when I recounted the events, there was a long, pregnant silence on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Ray, this is the easiest lawsuit I've ever filed. We sued the HOA for violating the Fair Housing Act and destroying private property." But I wasn't stopping there. I wrote an article detailing every injustice, every legal violation, every condescending statement. I included photos, legal citations, quotes from disability rights organizations, and blasted it to every news outlet, advocacy group, and legal publication I could find. The response was immediate. The story exploded. News stations clamored for interviews. Disability activists organized protests outside the HOA office, and the State Attorney General's office launched a formal investigation. And then, the Department of Justice got involved. The moment the federal government stepped in, panic seized Westbrook Pines. Board members started resigning faster than you could say a DA violation. Neil Davenport suddenly developed a mysterious ailment that required him to step down. Even Margaret, the unflappable queen, vanished from public view. But she wasn't giving up. She hired a lawyer, attempting to argue that the RAM was a temporary structure that violated some obscure rule. She refused to yield. It was turning into a national spectacle, a battleground for disability rights law. Politicians made statements, legal fees spiraled out of control, and yet the ramp remained gone. Danielle couldn't visit. One evening, I stood on my porch, staring at the empty space where the ramp had been, the oppressive Florida heat clinging to my skin. My phone buzzed. A new email from Margaret Sterling. Subject: settlement offer. I opened it, read it, then read it again, and my fists clenched because I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. Margaret Sterling wasn't the type to back down easily, but the fact that she was sending a settlement offer meant one thing. She was starting to feel the pressure. I clicked open the attachment. A laughable sum of money offered in exchange for dropping a lawsuit and agreeing not to rebuild the ramp. I drew a slow breath, my fingers digging into the edges of my phone. They thought this was about money. They thought a few $1,000s would make me forget that my sister couldn't even access my home, that they had torn apart an accessibility structure without warning, then tried to bury their actions under a mountain of bureaucracy. I forwarded the email to Jeff. Then, without a second thought, I hit delete. The next few weeks resembled something out of a fever dream. The HOA board was in shambles. Public outrage had reached a fever pitch, more than they anticipated. The Clearwater Sun ran a story titled, "Local HOA sued for discriminating against disabled women." It was the kind of headline that ignited fury. And it wasn't just advocacy groups getting involved. My neighbors, people I thought were complacent, were beginning to stop. For years, Margaret Sterling had ruled Westbrook Pines like a tyrant, and people were afraid of her. Lawsuits, threats of foreclosure feed seemed what happened to those who dared to question her. But now, sensing her weakness, they smelled blood in the water. Emails started flooding my inbox from other residents, sharing their own stories of Margaret's petty tyranny. One message in particular resonated. "Mr. Carter." It read, "I don't know if you remember me, but my name is Sandra Lynn. I live on Maplecrest Drive. My parents moved here in 2005. They were older, first-generation immigrants, not fluent in English. Margaret fined them for unapproved landscaping because my mother planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard. When they tried to fight it, she escalated the fines until they had no choice but to sell their home. I was in college at the time and didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. I've always regretted not doing more. If you need anything, witness statements, HOA records, I'm here to help. Sincerely, Sandra. Sandra wasn't alone. I heard from a single mother who had been fined for excessive noise because her autistic son stimmed loudly. A veteran in a wheelchair who had been denied a ramp request years ago. A widowed retiree who had been charged $500 because her shutters were the wrong shade of blue. Margaret Sterling had spent years weaponizing HOA regulations against anyone she deemed undesirable, and no one had dared to fight back. Until now. Then came the night someone tried to scare me. Around 1 o'clock a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of tires screeching outside. Not the casual hum of a car passing by, but something fast, reckless. My heart hammered in my chest. Then, a heavy thud against my front door. I flew out of bed, grabbing my phone, yanking the curtains aside. Headlights flashed as a dark SUV peeled off, tires burning rubber down the street. I barely caught the model. Black SUV, no plates. I rushed to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped outside. Something was lying on my porch. A brick, a solid, heavy brick, sitting against my front door. No spray paint, no dramatic message, just a blatant act of intimidation. My hands clenched into fists. Cowards, whoever did this didn't have the guts to face me directly. I took a slow breath, forcing my pulse to steady. Then, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo. I wasn't stopping. If they thought intimidation would make me back down, they had severely underestimated me. The next morning, I filed a police report. Not that I expected much. The Clearwater PD probably had better things to do and tracked out some idiot throwing bricks. But I wanted it documented. I also sent the photo to Jeff, who was already piling more ammunition onto the lawsuit. By now, the legal pressure was immense. The DOJ was officially investigating them. Margaret Sterling had stopped appearing at board meetings. She was in hiding, but I knew she wasn't done. Margaret had spent years ruling this neighborhood like a dictator. She wasn't just going to walk away. She was planning something, and I needed to be ready. I knew Margaret Sterling wouldn't go down without a fight. She was the kind of person who believed in her own power, who believed that if she pushed hard enough, manipulated the right people, and exploited enough legal loopholes, she would win. But the thing about people like her is that they never know when to stop digging their own graves. I had gathered too much evidence now. Emails, HOA records, statements from homeowners. Jeff and I were building a case so airtight. There was no way they would win. The wooden ramp may be gone, but justice was coming. The night after the brick incident, I sat in my office, scrolling through the documents Sandra Lynn had sent me. Dozens of fines, all targeted at minorities, disabled residents, single mothers, anyone Margaret saw as not fitting the neighborhood standards. I had an entire history of discrimination right in front of me, and I was going to use it. The next HOA board meeting was packed. Usually, these things were dull, sparsely attended affairs. But tonight, the entire community showed up. I walked in late, intentionally. I wanted Margaret to see me walk through those doors, to feel the shift in the room, and people turned in my direction. She was seated at the front of the room, next to what was left of her crumbling board. Neil Davenport, along with the other members who had jumped ship when the DOJ got involved, were no longer there. Instead, were several nervous-looking replacements who had no idea what they'd walked into. Margaret didn't look as confident anymore. She still wore her pearls and sat with her spine ramrod straight, but there was a forced stiffness to her movements, a tightness on her mouth. She knew she was losing control. I took a seat near the back, arms crossed, waiting. Then, the meeting began. People unleashed hell on her. It started small. An elderly woman stood up and demanded to know why the HOA had wasted tens of thousands of dollars on legal fees for a lawsuit they couldn't win. A younger couple asked why Margaret had personally denied their request to build a wheelchair ramp for their disabled son. Then, Sandra Lynn stood up, and she didn't hold back. "My parents were forced out of their home because of you," she said, her voice steady but ice cold. "You used the HOA rules to target them, to fine them into the ground, until they had no choice but to sell. And they weren't the only ones. How many others? Margaret, how many people have you pushed out of this neighborhood because they didn't fit your vision?" Margaret opened her mouth to interrupt, but Sandra wasn't finished. "I have emails. I have letters from homeowners you victimized. And guess what? I sent them all to the DOJ investigation team." The entire room erupted. "This is a witch hunt," Margaret snapped, standing so fast her chair nearly toppled over. "I have done nothing wrong. The HOA exists to maintain community standards." A man in the front row laughed derisively. "You mean like kicking out a veteran because his wheelchair ramp didn't match your damn color scheme?" More people started yelling, their voices overlapping, some furious, others gleeful, watching Margaret unravel in real time. I didn't say a word. I just sat back, arms still crossed, watching her burn. The final blow came 2 days later. The DOJ announced their findings. The Westboro Pines HOA, under Margaret's leadership, had engaged in systemic discrimination and violated the Fair Housing Act. The punishment was severe: a federal lawsuit, a massive fine that would bankrupt the association, a government order to rewrite their bylaws, approve all pending accessibility requests, and implement mandatory anti-discrimination training for any future board members. But the best part? Margaret Sterling was personally fined to $150,000 and banned from holding any HOA leadership position, ever. The day the news broke, I sat on my porch, a brand new wheelchair ramp fully installed, sipping my coffee, as I watched a moving truck pull up in front of Margaret's house. She had put it on the market the week before. No one wanted to live under the thumb of the woman who had made national headlines for discriminating against a disabled person. She stormed out of her front door, tense and furious, her perfectly styled bob looking a little less perfect. Her eyes flicked across the street, landing on me. I raised my coffee mug in a mocking salute. Margaret spun on her heel and stomped toward her car. She never looked back. I didn't just win, I exposed a system of prejudice and helped empower an entire community. So, Reddit, I have to ask you, after everything you've heard, do you think I handled this situation the right way? I know some might say I was too relentless, but how else do you fight that kind of ingrained arrogance? I'm genuinely interested to hear your perspectives and opinions on how I responded to Margaret and the HOA's actions, because now I'm second guessing some of the decisions I made. During that crazy time, I'm wondering if I could have done things differently but still achieved the same outcome.